The rain came down in sheets that afternoon. The kind of cold, punishing downpour that makes the whole world feel like a small wet room. It hammered against the windows of the Lily Grace Women's Health Center, a low, beige building tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down pizzeria on the less polished side of Arbor Hills. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and something sweeter, a cloying lavender air freshener that failed utterly to mask the metallic tang of fear. Elara Vance, 34 years old, sat in a plastic chair molded to fit a body nothing like hers. Her body was a geography of softness wide, hips that strained the seams of her best black leggings, a belly that rounded gently over the waistband, arms that were strong but cushioned, breasts that were heavy and full. She was a Rubens painting in a world that demanded stick figures, and in this sterile room, her softness felt like a loud, shameful announcement of her failure. She clutched a clipboard, the paper on it damp from her sweating palms, the words informed consent, blurring in and out of focus. Her other hand rested, trembling, on the swell of her stomach. 14 weeks. Just a small, hard cantaloupe hidden beneath the landscape of her flesh. A secret she had carried alone. The biological father, a man named Derek with a smile like a used car commercial, had evaporated the moment the pink line appeared. His last text, a monument to cowardice, was still on her phone. "Babe, this isn't my chapter. You do what you gotta do. Lose my number." Babe. He'd called her babe while signing off on her life. She had stared at that message for 3 days, the blue light of the screen the only illumination in her one-bedroom apartment, while her heart calcified into a small, hard stone of resolve. She would do this. She was a receptionist at a dental office. She had $53 in her savings account after the rent cleared, and she could barely keep her one struggling orchid alive. She couldn't do this. This wasn't a chapter, as Derek had put it. It was the entire terrifying book. The clinic was a symphony of muffled sorrows. A woman in the corner wept silently into a wad of tissues, her shoulders shaking. Another, impossibly young, stared at a video on her phone. The tinny sound of a cartoon laugh track a grotesque counterpoint to the room's heavy silence. They all moved through a choreography of dread. Weigh in, blood test, a short, disembodied chat about options, from a counselor whose eyes held the practiced sympathy of someone who'd seen too much. Elara's name was called. She gave her blood. She was weighed, the number on the scale a fresh, sharp sting. Now, she was back in the waiting room, the final signature the only thing left before the procedure. The door that led to the back, to the quiet rooms, loomed like a mouth. Her mind was a frantic, trapped bird. You can't afford daycare. You can barely afford yourself. What about when you get sick? What about when the car breaks down? You'll be tethered to Derek forever through a child he never wanted. A child who will one day ask, and you'll have to say, "He said I wasn't his chapter." The logic was a fortress of steel, impenetrable and cold. But inside the fortress, a tiny, rebellious prisoner beat its fists against the walls. A flutter. Not a kick. Not yet. Just a phantom whisper of a fishtail. A secret Morse code tapped out in the warm ocean of her body. "Mama, I'm here." She pressed her hand harder against her belly, as if to silence it, and a single, hot tear traced a path down her cheek and dripped onto the clipboard, smearing the ink. A sudden gust of wind rattled the glass door. A sound of pure, chaotic weather. And then, cutting through the storm's percussion, the door swung open with such force that the little bell above it didn't tinkle so much as scream. He didn't walk in. He blew in, a figure silhouetted against the grey deluge, an overcoat flapping like dark wings. Water streamed from the brim of a hat pulled low. He wrenched it off, and a shock of dark, wet hair was revealed, plastered to a forehead that sat above, a face that seemed to have been sculpted by a more passionate, reckless artist than the one who made ordinary men. He was handsome in a way that was almost a physical interruption. The sharp jawline and the angle of his cheekbones a stark, beautiful contrast to the soft, worried faces in the room. But it was his eyes that seized the air from Elara's lungs. They were a deep, troubled grey, the colour of the storm outside, and they were wild with a frantic, predatory desperation that made the receptionist's hand freeze halfway to her mouth. His gaze swept the room, a predator scanning for its prey. It brushed over the crying woman, the young girl, and then it landed on Elara. It stopped. It fixed on her face, and then dropped, with an unnerving certainty, to the hand she had pressed against her stomach. A visible tremor ran through him. In 2 long, dripping strides he crossed the room. He didn't stop at the reception desk. He came straight to her, his wet coat shedding rain onto the scuffed linoleum floor, and without a shred of preamble, dropped to his knees before her chair. His hands, cold and wet, closed over the hand that was still on her belly. The touch was an electric shock. She gasped, trying to pull back, but his grip was gentle, imploring iron. The room tilted. The receptionist was saying, "Sir, you can't just..." But he paid her no mind. He looked up at Elara, and the wild desperation in his grey eyes coalesced into a single, burning point of intense focus. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, rough plea, frayed at the edges with an emotion so raw it was barely contained. "Please," he said, the single word a breaking dam. "Please don't do this." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. A trapped animal. Her mind was a white noise scream of confusion. Was he a crazed protester? A clinic shooter? A figment of her stress-induced hallucination? She found her voice, a thin, reedy thing. Who are you? Let go of me." "You can't take her," he said, his eyes searching her face as if looking for a window to a soul he already knew. "You can't take my daughter." The air froze. The crying woman stopped crying. The young girl looked up from her cartoon. "Daughter?" Elara breathed the word, tasting alien. I don't know you. There's some mistake. My baby. I don't even know the sex." "Her name is Lily," he whispered, the certainty in his voice sending a shiver of pure, inexplicable terror down her spine. "She has your eyes, but my stubbornness. She loved the rain and the smell of old books. Please, Elara, you have to believe me." Her own name, spoken by this beautiful, drenched stranger, was the final, surreal straw. The world swam. Black dots pricked at the edge of her vision. A deep, resonant hum filled her ears, drowning out the storm, the muffled cries, the sharp voice of the receptionist threatening to call the police. The last thing she saw, before the world dissolved, was the impossible truth in his storm-colored eyes. And then Elara Vance fainted. She woke on a cheap, cracked vinyl couch in a small counselor's office. The smell of lavender was stronger here, mixed with the damp wool of his coat, which was now draped over her like a blanket. He was sitting in a chair across from her, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. Without the wild panic of his entrance, he looked drained, hollowed out. The receptionist, a stern woman named Carol, was standing by the door, arms crossed, radiating suspicion. "She's awake," Carol said flatly, "and I've called security. You have about 90 seconds to explain yourself, before I have them hold you for the police." He raised his head, and his eyes met Elara's. The madness was gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "For the dramatics. I didn't know any other way to stop time." He took a shaky breath. "My name is Julian Croft, and I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible." He began to speak, his voice low and steady, and the story he told was the most logical, heart-shattering madness she had ever heard. "6 months from now," he said, You'll be on maternity leave. You'll be a brilliant mother, but you'll be lonely and terrified. One rainy night, you'll take Lily. Yes, you name her Lily, after your grandmother to a 24-hour diner because she won't stop crying and you're afraid the neighbors will complain. I'll be there, at the counter, staring into a cup of coffee, trying to outrun my own demons. A failed engagement. A career in architecture that feels like building empty cages. I was a ghost in my own life. He paused, his gaze turning inward. A ghost of a smile touching his lips. Lily stopped crying the moment she saw me. She reached out one fat little hand from her carrier and grabbed my finger. You apologized, frazzled, so beautifully real in your exhaustion. I bought you a slice of pie. Pecan. And from that moment, I was a ghost no longer. I was anchored. Elara listened, frozen, the coat's warmth seeping into her cold bones. The detail was terrifyingly specific. Grandmother Lily. Pecan pie. Her favorite. We fell in love, he continued, his voice gaining strength. A resonant certainty. Not a movie love. A real one. Built on 3 a.m. feedings and me learning to braid hair. I saw you, Elara. Not the softness you see as a flaw, but a goddess's abundance. A mother's body that was made for comfort and warmth. You'd fall asleep on my chest, Lily on yours, and the weight of you both felt like the only thing that had ever held me together. I was a stepfather in every way that mattered. Her first word was Dada, and it was to me. Her first steps were into my arms. The real father, the biological one. He was less than a ghost. A non-entity. We were a family. You, me, and Lily. We were a trinity, perfect and complete. His voice broke. The sound was so sharp with grief that Carol, by the door, uncrossed her arms. 3 years, he whispered. We had 3 years. A car crash. A drunk driver ran a red light. You were killed instantly. Lily was in the back seat. She held on for 2 days. Elara's throat closed. She couldn't speak. This was a delusion, a cruel, elaborate hoax. But his eyes were raw, weeping wells of a grief so profound and genuine that it felt more real than the linoleum floor, more real than the chair beneath her. I was destroyed, Julian said, the word a simple, devastating statement of fact. I spent a year trying to follow you. Into a bottle. Off a bridge. Nothing worked. I couldn't live in a world without you both. And then I found them. A physicist who'd gone mad with grief, just like me. He'd theorized a way. Not a time machine, not in the way of movies. A rip. A doorway through a specific kind of quantum resonance. A frequency of memory and matter. And the unbearable pressure of a father's love. It cost him his life. It nearly cost me mine. He looked at her, and the logic of his madness was a beautiful, terrifying architecture. You told me once. In a quiet moment, you confessed your deepest shame. You told me that on the day you came here to end the pregnancy, you felt a flutter and you hesitated. You told me that for one fleeting second, you wished for a sign, a reason, a miracle to change your mind. And I knew, if I could go anywhere to any time, it wouldn't be to the day of the crash. I couldn't save you then, but I could come here. I could be the sign. I could be the miracle. I could save our daughter's life before it was ever in danger, by saving her right now. He stood up, the movement slow, as if his bones were made of lead. He knelt before her again, but this time the storm was gone. In its place was a quiet, sacred gravity. He took her hand. I'm not asking you to believe in time travel. I'm asking you to believe in the feeling in your gut when you see me. I'm asking you to believe in the love I have already given you in a future that now will never exist. The irresponsible man is gone. Forget him. He's nothing. I am here. I am offering myself, not as a savior, not as a hero, but as the stepfather I already am. I know her cry. I know she'd be allergic to strawberries and love Beethoven. I know the exact weight of her when she falls asleep on your chest, squeezed her hand, a lifeline thrown across an impossible chasm. Marry me, Elara. Not because of a crazy story, but because you don't want to be alone anymore. Let me be Lily's stepfather. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that every word I've said, no matter how insane, is the absolute, unshakable truth. Tears were streaming down Elara's face, a silent, unstoppable river. The clinical logic that had built the fortress around her heart crumbled into dust. Because right then, a flutter, stronger than ever before, rippled through her belly. A definitive, insistent kick. Mama, he's here. The sign is here. The door burst open and a security guard, a burly man with a hand on his taser, filled the frame. Ma'am, is this man bothering you? Elara leapt from the guard to Carol, to the desperate, beautiful, grief-stricken man on his knees before her. She saw her life, starkly divided into two paths. One was the cold, logical hallway out of this clinic, back to her silent apartment, to a future of what-ifs that would echo forever in the sterile space, where her heart used to be. The other was a leap into the glorious, terrifying, illogical unknown, guided by a man who had ripped a hole in time for the love of a child who was still, in this moment, only a whisper of a soul. She placed her other hand on top of Julian's, a trinity of touch on the swell of her child. The fear didn't vanish, but it was suddenly, miraculously, outweighed by something far, far greater. It was a seed of hope, watered by this madman's tears, and she could feel it cracking open in her chest, a painful, beautiful bloom. She found her voice. It was no longer thin and reedy, but deep and clear, a bell ringing in a new dawn. She lit directly at the security guard, and her words changed the world. No, Elara said, her eyes never leaving Julian's, a trembling smile breaking across her face like the sun through the retreating storm clouds. No, he's not bothering me. He's my husband. And he's just a little early for the appointment.